High Counselor Velthera entered the Galactic Assembly Chamber for what she knew would be the most important session in Coalition history. Around her, representatives from 12 species waited to hear words that no one had ever expected to say. The war against humanity had lasted 3 years. By every military measure, the Coalition had won. They had destroyed over 90% of human ships, occupied most human territory, and inflicted casualties that should have ended any species' ability to resist. Instead, they were here to surrender. The Coalition Council formally recommends immediate cessation of all hostile operations against the human species, Velthara announced, her crystalline voice carrying across the silent chamber. The numbers told a story that defied logic. The Coalition had lost 31% of its total military strength. 6 member species had withdrawn from the alliance entirely. Human forces continued operating throughout Coalition space despite having no official territory left to defend. How is this possible? Asked the delegate from the Yixthalan Confederacy. They have no worlds, no fleets, no infrastructure. How can they still be fighting? Velthara displayed holographic data that made several delegates physically recoil. Human forces are present in every sector of Coalition space. They operate independently using captured equipment and supplies. Our intelligence estimates suggest between 50 and 100,000 human combatants remain active throughout our territory. What she didn't say was worse. Coalition forces were so demoralized that many units were refusing to engage humans under any circumstances. Entire fleets had requested reassignment to non-human sectors. Some species were threatening to leave the Coalition entirely if forced to continue fighting. Strategic analyst Dr. Moon Jae-kyung was monitoring the proceedings from Earth's hidden listening post. Her report to Earth Command was brief and triumphant. They're done. Complete military collapse. They're classifying us as Category X, the first species in galactic history considered too dangerous to engage. Category X had been created specifically for humanity. It was a classification reserved for species whose mere existence posed an unacceptable risk to Coalition stability. On Earth, Captain Park Seo-jin prepared for something unprecedented. Peace negotiations where humanity held all the cards despite having lost the war. Her body bore scars from 3 near-death experiences, and her eyes held the cold determination of someone who had seen civilization's edge. "What are our demands?" asked Admiral Choi Min-soo. Park Seo-jin smiled grimly. "Complete withdrawal of Coalition forces from all human-claimed space, recognition of humanity's right to expand into any unclaimed stellar regions, and formal acknowledgement that human space is off-limits to Coalition vessels. That's everything we wanted before the war started, plus interest for making us fight for it, the peace." Negotiations took place on a neutral space station, but nothing about them was neutral. Coalition representatives trembled visibly in the presence of human delegates. Security footage from the talks would later become legendary among human forces. Ambassador Kim Tae-woo led the human delegation with quiet authority. He was a diplomat, not a soldier, but he had spent 3 years watching his species fight for survival. That experience had changed him in ways that made Coalition negotiators deeply uncomfortable. "The terms are simple," he explained to Coalition mediator Yixthara. "You leave us alone, completely, permanently. In return, we stop demonstrating why that's a good idea." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Humans weren't asking for peace. They were offering to stop the psychological terror campaign that was tearing Coalition society apart. Coalition intelligence had documented the scope of that campaign. Human operatives throughout Coalition space had created a culture of fear that affected every level of society. Children refused to sleep without lights. Adults avoided traveling through certain sectors of space. Military recruitment had stopped entirely in some species. "We accept all human terms unconditionally," Yixthara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The treaty signing lasted less than an hour. No ceremony, no speeches, no diplomatic celebration. Coalition representatives signed the documents as quickly as possible and left immediately. Ambassador Kim Tae-woo watched them go with satisfaction. "They can't get away from us fast enough." Admiral Lee Dae-ho, now promoted after his distinguished service throughout the war, oversaw humanity's first post-war expansion fleet. 12 ships carrying colonists and equipment toward unclaimed star systems that had been off-limits during Coalition control. But something remarkable happened as the human fleet moved through space. Coalition vessels detected their approach and immediately changed course to avoid them. Shipping routes that had been used for thousands of years were abandoned rather than risk encountering humans. "They're giving us a wide berth," reported the navigation officer. "Coalition traffic is staying at least 10 light-years away from our course." Lee Daeho nodded with grim satisfaction. "Good. Let them remember what happens when they get too close." Dr. Song Byung-ho continued monitoring coalition communication networks, documenting how humanity's reputation was spreading throughout the galaxy. What he found exceeded his wildest expectations. "We've become a cultural phenomenon," he reported to Earth Command. "Coalition species are incorporating human into their languages as a synonym for unstoppable force." The linguistic evidence was overwhelming. In Kethmori, to human meant to continue despite impossible odds. In Merthalan, human stubborn described someone who would rather die than compromise. In Yixthalan, human touched referred to someone who had lost all fear of death. But the most significant change was in coalition military doctrine. War colleges throughout alien space now taught human-style warfare as a theoretical concept too dangerous to actually implement. "They study our tactics," Dr. Song Byung-ho explained, "but they don't dare use them. The psychological cost is too high for their species to bear." Coalition military manuals now included entire chapters devoted to recognizing and avoiding conflicts with human-type adversaries. The psychological profiles painted humans as creatures fundamentally different from all known intelligent life, immune to standard intimidation techniques. Read one coalition training document. Demonstrate increased aggression when threatened. Will accept complete destruction rather than surrender. Recommend immediate retreat upon confirmed human contact. Dr. Hong Yijin documented how humanity had become embedded in coalition folklore. Stories about humans were told throughout alien space, growing more elaborate and terrifying with each generation. "We're not just military opponents anymore," she explained. "We're mythological figures. Coalition children learn about humans the way human children learn about monsters." The stories shared common themes across different species. Humans who returned from the dead to seek revenge. Human ships that could appear anywhere without warning. Human leaders who could see the future and always stayed one step ahead of their enemies. "The stories aren't accurate," Dr. Hong Yejin noted, "but they serve a purpose. They ensure that coalition species will never underestimate humanity again." Commander Shin Dong-wook, the sole survivor of his family line after both his brothers died in the war, led a routine patrol through former coalition space. What he found was a galaxy transformed by fear, empty space stations that had been abandoned when humans appeared in the area. Trade routes diverted around entire star systems where human activity had been reported. Whole sectors of space that coalition ships now avoided entirely. "They've given us more territory through fear than we ever claimed through colonization," he reported to Fleet Command. The economic impact on the coalition was staggering. Trade between member worlds had collapsed. Military expenses had bankrupted entire civilizations. Some species were considering leaving the galaxy entirely to escape the possibility of future human contact. Intelligence analyst Nayun Seo intercepted coalition transmissions that revealed the full scope of their psychological collapse. Recommend galaxy-wide policy. All vessels to maintain minimum 50 light-year distance from confirmed human space. Any contact with human forces should result in immediate withdrawal without engagement. Under no circumstances should coalition personnel attempt to capture, communicate with, or study human subjects. As humanity's expansion continued, something unprecedented happened throughout the galaxy. When coalition crews detected ships of unknown origin, they immediately assumed the worst. Unknown contact on sensors became code for possible human vessel. Ship crews would change course, abandon cargo, even jettison equipment rather than risk an encounter with what might be humans. The psychological terror was so complete that coalition forces were now afraid of their own shadows. Any unusual sensor reading, any unexpected communication, any deviation from normal patterns was immediately assumed to be human in origin. Dr. Kim Woobin studied the long-term implications of humanity's victory. "We've achieved something unique in galactic history. We've won through reputation rather than conquest. The evidence was everywhere. Coalition military strength had been reduced by half, not through direct combat losses but through desertions, refusals to serve, and entire units requesting transfer to non-combat roles. Fleet Marshal Zixandra looked at the reports with mild interest. The humans had not responded to the ultimatum. This was slightly unusual but not concerning. Young species often needed time to accept reality. Zixandra was a Kethmori, one of the Coalition's founding species. Her people looked like giant insects with 4 arms and compound eyes that could see in multiple dimensions. They had been exploring space for 3,000 years. They knew how these things worked. "How many ships should we send?" asked her aide, a nervous creature from the aquatic Merthalan species. Zixandra barely looked up from her meal. She was eating small fish that were still alive, a delicacy from her homeworld. "The usual amount. 12% of our total fleet should be more than enough." 12%? The aide seemed surprised. "For an entire species?" "They're primitives," Zixandra explained patiently. "They've been in space for barely a century. They have no energy shields, no plasma weapons, no faster-than-light communication. One show of force and they'll surrender." The aide made notes on his waterproof tablet. "Should we prepare occupation forces?" "A small group. Maybe 1,000 troops for the entire human territory. Once they see our ships, they'll welcome us as liberators from their own ignorance." Halfway across the galaxy, General Han Jiwoo was having a very different conversation. Earth's military factories were running day and night. Every ship in the human fleet was being upgraded with whatever weapons they could manage, but the numbers were terrifying. Intelligence reports suggested the Coalition had over 10,000 warships. Humans had less than 300, and their weapons seemed like toys compared to alien technology. "We need something they don't expect," General Han Jiwoo told his staff. "Something that gives us an advantage." Engineer Yoon Haijin raised her hand. She was young, barely 30, but she had ideas that made older officers uncomfortable. "What if we stop trying to fight their war?" "What do you mean?" Yoon Haijin stood up and walked to the display screen. "Every report says the same thing. The Coalition fights like a traditional military. They line up their big ships and shoot until someone surrenders. It's very polite," General Han Jiwoo frowned.
Polite warfare?
"Think about it. They're from 12 different species, but they all work together. That means they have rules. Ways of fighting that everyone agrees on. Honor codes. Probably treaties about what weapons are acceptable." Another officer spoke up. So humans never signed those treaties." Yoon Haijin's eyes were bright with dangerous ideas. "We don't have to fight politely." Meanwhile, Lieutenant Colonel Bae Yoon-young was leading humanity's first scouting mission into Coalition space. Her ship was small and fast, designed to avoid detection. For 2 weeks, she had been watching alien ships and listening to their communications. What she found was shocking. "They don't post guards," she reported back to Earth. "Their ships just sit there in neat formations. They take breaks at regular times. They follow schedules like they're delivering mail, not preparing for war." The communication delay meant it took several minutes for Earth to respond. When they did, the voice sounded confused. "Are you sure? No defensive positions?" "None. And their ground forces are even worse. They set up camps with clear boundaries. They have regular patrol routes. It's like they've never heard of guerrilla warfare." Bae Yoon-young watched a Coalition patrol ship pass by her hiding spot. It was massive and beautiful, covered in energy shields that sparkled like stars, but it flew in a straight line at constant speed, broadcasting its position to anyone who cared to listen. "Command, I think they've never fought anyone who didn't follow the rules." Back on Earth, Dr. Kim Woo-bin was studying every piece of information they could gather about Coalition psychology. What he found was both encouraging and terrifying. "They're not evil," he explained to the War Council. "They genuinely believe they're helping us. In their minds, they're saving humanity from the dangers of space exploration." Admiral Choi Min-soo looked skeptical. "By destroying us?" "By integrating us. They'll study our biology, preserve our art, record our history. Then they'll eliminate us as an independent species and move on. To them, it's merciful." "And the 17 other species?" Dr. Kim Woo-bin pulled up holographic displays showing the Coalition's history. Each one followed the same pattern. First contact, ultimatum, brief resistance, then absorption. The longest any species fought was 6 months. Why so short? Because they were reasonable. When they saw they couldn't win, they negotiated. They tried to save as many of their people as possible. They acted logically. General Han Jiwoo leaned forward. And humans. Humans aren't logical. Not when we're angry. Not when someone threatens our family. The first test came sooner than expected. A coalition scout force discovered a human mining station in the Proxima system. The alien commander, following standard procedure, sent a polite message demanding surrender. The humans responded by attacking immediately. Commander Shin Dong-wook led the defense with just 3 small ships against a coalition squadron of 12. By every reasonable measure, it should have been a massacre. The alien ships were bigger, faster, and better armed. Instead, it became the coalition's first lesson in human warfare. The humans didn't line up for a proper battle. They hid behind asteroids and attacked from multiple directions. When their shields failed, they kept fighting. When their weapons ran out, they tried to ram the alien ships. Most shocking of all, when defeat was certain, the humans didn't surrender. They kept fighting until their ships were destroyed. The coalition force won, but they were badly damaged and deeply confused. They sent a report back to their commanders that made no sense. The humans fought beyond all reason, the alien captain reported. They continued attacking even when victory was impossible. They seemed to prefer death to capture. We have never encountered such behavior. Fleet Marshal Zixandra read the report 3 times. Then she called her aide. Increase the fleet allocation to 20%, she ordered. 20%? For primitives? Zixandra looked at the report again. 3 human ships had damaged 6 coalition vessels and destroyed 2 completely. The math didn't make sense. Perhaps they're not as primitive as we thought. On Earth, news of the battle spread quickly. Commander Shin Dong-wook was dead, along with his entire crew. But they had proven something important. They can bleed, General Han Jiwoo told his officers. Their ships can be destroyed. Their crews can be killed. They're not gods. They're just aliens who've never fought anyone willing to die. Engineer Yoon Hae-jin was already working on new tactics. If they want a war, we'll give them one. But it won't be the kind of war they're expecting. Lieutenant Colonel Bae Yoon-young's scouting reports were becoming more valuable every day. She had identified coalition supply routes, communication patterns, and something even more important. They're scared, she reported. The crew chatter has changed. They're talking about the humans who wouldn't surrender. Some of them are asking for transfers to other sectors. Dr. Kim Woo-bin compiled all the intelligence into a single report. The coalition has never fought a species that preferred death to defeat. Their entire military doctrine assumes rational opponents who will surrender when the cost becomes too high. Admiral Choi Min-soo read the report and smiled grimly. Then they're about to learn something new about the galaxy. The coalition fleet was coming. Thousands of ships with weapons that could destroy planets. But for the first time since the crisis began, humans weren't afraid. They were angry. Dr. Ryu Min-jung had spent her career studying alien psychology, but nothing had prepared her for what she was seeing now. Coalition broadcasts from across the galaxy told the same impossible story. Humans were everywhere. It's statistically impossible, she explained to Earth's Intelligence Committee. Our infiltration teams number in the thousands, but coalition reports suggest human presence on over 10,000 worlds simultaneously. The truth was both simpler and more terrifying than the numbers suggested. Humans weren't actually present on all those worlds, but the coalition thought they were, and that was enough. Major General Lim Ji-ho had designed what he called phantom campaigns, operations meant to convince the coalition that humanity could strike anywhere at any time. Small teams of volunteers would hit multiple targets across vast distances, creating the illusion of a much larger force. We hit 12 worlds in 1 week, he reported proudly. Different star systems, different sectors. The coalition thinks we have faster-than-light transportation technology we don't actually possess. The secret was humanity's willingness to sacrifice everything for strategic advantage. Human teams would spend months traveling through enemy space in tiny ships, surviving on captured supplies and equipment they salvaged from coalition forces. These weren't temporary missions. The volunteers knew they would never return home. Their only purpose was to prove that coalition space wasn't safe from human reach. Special Operations Director Park Kyung-soo coordinated these suicide missions with the cold efficiency of someone who understood exactly what he was asking people to do. We're not trying to conquer their territory, he explained to new volunteers. We're trying to conquer their minds. Every time you strike a coalition target, You're not just destroying equipment, you're destroying their sense of security. The psychological impact was exactly what humanity hoped for. Coalition civilians lived in constant fear of ghost humans who could appear anywhere without warning. Cultural. Anthropologist Dr. Hong Ye-jin studied captured coalition materials and made a discovery that changed everything. Humanity was becoming a galactic myth. Look at this, she showed. The command staff intercepted coalition children's stories. They're telling their young ones about humans who rise from the dead, about human ships that repair themselves through willpower, about human commanders who can see the future. The stories were based on real encounters, but they had grown in the telling. Coalition crews who survived human attacks often reported details that seemed impossible. Humans who kept fighting after being shot multiple times. Human ships that continued attacking even after their hulls were breached. Human officers who seemed to predict coalition tactics perfectly. They're not lying, Dr. Hong Ye-jin explained. They're just describing things their minds can't process rationally. A human hopped up on adrenaline and painkillers can seem supernatural to someone who's never seen that before. The Coalition's own intelligence reports confirmed this psychological breakdown. Their analysts were struggling to separate fact from fiction in their own combat reports. Human capabilities appear to exceed known biological limitations, one Coalition study concluded. Further investigation is recommended to determine if humans possess supernatural abilities. Admiral Yang Jae-sung was about to give them more evidence for their supernatural theories. Coalition forces had gathered their largest fleet yet for a final assault on the Proxima Centauri system. Over 3,000 ships, including their most powerful dreadnoughts. Yang Jae-sung had 17 human ships to defend the system. Any rational commander would have evacuated. The odds were impossible, the outcome predetermined. Yang Jae-sung studied the tactical situation and came to a different conclusion. If we can't win conventionally, we don't fight conventionally. His plan was so insane that coalition forces never saw it coming. Instead of trying to fight the enemy fleet, Yang Jae-sung decided to weaponize the system's star. Using carefully placed nuclear charges and some extremely risky gravitational calculations, the human fleet triggered a series of solar flares that swept through the entire system. The electromagnetic pulse destroyed most electronics and created radiation levels that would kill any unprotected crew within hours. Both fleets were caught in the disaster. But humans had spent months preparing radiation-hardened shelters and survival equipment. Coalition forces had no such preparations. "It's impossible," the Coalition fleet commander transmitted as his ships began to die around him. No species would deliberately trigger a stellar event in their own system. Yang Jae-sung's response became legendary among human forces. "You don't understand humans very well. The battle destroyed both fleets. But human survivors escaped in specially shielded pods while coalition forces were wiped out completely. More importantly, news of the battle spread throughout coalition space like wildfire. They used a star as a weapon," coalition reports stated with something approaching religious awe. "They sacrificed their own system to destroy our fleet. These are not rational beings." War Marshal Kexthoran reviewed the Proxima Centauri reports with growing horror. He had been fighting humans for 2 years and thought he understood their psychology. He was wrong. "They don't just refuse to surrender," he explained to his staff. "They actively seek ways to make victory as costly as possible for us. They would rather destroy entire star systems than let us have them." Coalition morale was now approaching complete collapse. Entire species within the coalition were demanding immediate withdrawal from human space. The economic cost of the war had exceeded the value of all human territory combined. But the psychological cost was incalculable. "Our crews are refusing combat assignments," Coalition Admiral Tixathura reported. "They're claiming equipment failures, requesting medical leave, even deserting their posts. They're more afraid of humans than they are of court-martial." Dr. Song Byung-ho's psychological warfare campaign had evolved far beyond anything he had originally planned. Coalition communication networks were flooded with stories about humans that seemed more like horror tales than military reports. Human soldiers who fought for days with fatal wounds. Human ships that seemed to appear from nowhere and vanish like ghosts. Human commanders who would rather die than retreat, and who took as many enemies with them as possible. "We've become the monster under their bed," Dr. Song Byung-ho explained to Earth Command. "Every coalition species has different nightmares, but they all include humans now." The most disturbing reports came from coalition medical facilities. Alien soldiers were developing what human doctors recognized as severe PTSD, but coalition medicine had no framework for understanding or treating psychological trauma. They've never had to deal with soldiers who've seen too much horror, reported Dr. Kim Woo-bin. Their species evolved to avoid unnecessary conflict. They have no mental defenses against the kind of warfare we practice. Coalition psychiatric reports described symptoms that seemed to defy medical explanation. Soldiers who couldn't sleep because they feared humans would appear in their dreams. Crews who saw human ships in empty space. Officers who heard human voices in static. Mass hallucination, coalition doctors concluded, because the alternative was admitting that an entire military alliance was developing species-wide trauma disorders. On Earth, strategists analyzed the intelligence reports with growing amazement. Humanity had achieved something unprecedented. They were winning a war by being too terrifying to fight. Traditional warfare is about controlling territory, explained General Han Ji-woo. We're practicing existential warfare. We're making the coalition afraid to exist in the same galaxy as us. The evidence was everywhere. Coalition shipping had stopped using routes that passed through or near human space. Trade between coalition worlds had dropped by 60% as merchants refused to risk encountering human raiders. Entire coalition fleets were being redeployed to sectors of space far from human territory. Species that had been eager to fight were now requesting transfers to the galaxy's outer rim. We're not just beating their military, Admiral Choi Min-soo observed. We're beating their civilization. They're reorganizing their entire society around avoiding us. Intelligence analyst Nayun Seo intercepted a coalition communication that summarized their situation perfectly. Recommend immediate cessation of human containment operations. Cost of victory exceeds all possible benefits. Human species demonstrates psychological warfare capabilities beyond known parameters. Classification upgrade to Category X recommended. Category X was a classification that had never been used before. It was reserved for species too dangerous to engage under any circumstances. They're not just afraid of us, Nayun Seo reported. They're creating a new category of fear specifically for humanity. As the third year of war began, coalition resistance was crumbling. But the humans weren't satisfied with mere victory. They wanted to ensure this never happened again. Dr. Hong Ye-jin studied coalition cultural changes and found something remarkable. Humanity was becoming part of alien folklore. Stories about humans were being told throughout coalition space, growing more terrifying with each retelling. We're not just winning a war, she explained. We're becoming eternal. Long after this conflict ends, coalition species will tell stories about the High Counselor Velthara stood before the Galactic Assembly with hands that shook despite her best efforts to remain calm. Around her, representatives from 12 different species waited to hear her report on the human situation. The report was 18 months overdue. By all normal calculations, the human problem should have been solved in 6 months. Instead, it had become something much worse. The situation has evolved beyond our initial projections, she began, her crystalline voice echoing through the great chamber. Human resistance continues despite suffering 90% casualties in every major engagement. Murmurs of confusion rippled through the assembly. The aquatic Murthalon representative raised a tentacle. How can they continue with such losses? They replace their forces faster than we can eliminate them, Velthara explained. Every human civilian appears to be a potential soldier. They have no distinction between military and non-military personnel. This was not entirely accurate, but it was how things appeared to coalition forces. Humans had indeed mobilized their entire population, but what truly confused the coalition was humanity's psychological resilience. The insectoid Kethmori delegate clicked her mandibles nervously. What about their industrial capacity? Surely they cannot continue producing weapons indefinitely. Velthara displayed a holographic chart that made several delegates gasp. Human industrial output has increased 300% since the war began. They have converted every manufacturing facility to weapons production. Some factories are operating with workers who sleep at their stations. What she didn't mention was even more disturbing. Coalition intelligence had discovered that humans were working themselves to death in their factories, literally dying from exhaustion rather than slowing production. This level of dedication was unprecedented in galactic history. Intelligence. Analyst Na Yun-seo was monitoring coalition communications from a hidden listening post near Vega. The report she Intercepted painted a picture of an enemy alliance that was slowly falling apart. The Meridian Collective is the first to crack, she reported to Earth Command. They're threatening to withdraw from the coalition if the war continues. They can't understand why we haven't surrendered yet. The Meridian Collective was a peaceful species that had joined the coalition for protection. They had expected the human conflict to be resolved quickly and painlessly. Instead, they found themselves part of a war of extermination against an enemy that refused to be exterminated. What about the others? Asked the intelligence officer receiving her report. The Korvathian Empire is pulling back forces. They've lost 3 entire battle groups to human swarm tactics. Their military doctrine doesn't account for enemies who use suicide attacks as standard procedure. Nayun Seo had been studying coalition psychology for months. Each species had evolved differently, but they all shared certain assumptions about rational behavior. None of those assumptions applied to humans under threat. Meanwhile, Rear Admiral Ju Sung-ho was preparing humanity's first major offensive operation since the war began. Intelligence had identified the coalition's primary shipyard at Vega Prime. It was heavily defended and strategically vital. It was also impossible to attack successfully. The shipyard was protected by orbital defense platforms, multiple fleet squadrons, and energy shields that could withstand planetary bombardment. Any rational military commander would look for a softer target. Admiral Ju Sung-ho wasn't rational. He was human. 70% casualties, he told his staff during the mission briefing. That's what the computers predict if we attack Vega Prime directly. 70% of our forces will be destroyed. His officers waited for him to explain why they were looking for alternatives. Instead, he smiled. 70% casualties are acceptable if we achieve the objective. The coalition expects us to avoid battles we can't win cleanly. We're going to show them that humans don't fight clean battles. The attack on Vega Prime became a coalition nightmare. Human ships appeared from multiple directions simultaneously, moving in patterns that seemed suicidal. They ignored defensive fire that should have destroyed them, pressing forward until they reached their targets. Coalition defenders had never seen anything like it. Human ships that were burning and venting atmosphere continued their attack runs. Crews that should have evacuated kept fighting even when their ships were falling apart around them. The shipyard's defenses held, but barely. More importantly, the psychological impact was devastating. Coalition crews had watched humans fight like creatures possessed, caring nothing for their own survival as long as they could damage their enemies. They're not soldiers, one traumatized coalition officer reported. They're some kind of death cult. They seem to enjoy dying if they can hurt us while they do it. War correspondent Kim So-hee was embedded with coalition forces under false identity papers. Her reports back to Earth revealed the true extent of the psychological damage humanity was inflicting. Coalition soldiers are showing symptoms of what we would call post-traumatic stress disorder, she reported, but their medical staff has no treatment for it. They've never encountered trauma before, because no coalition species has ever fought an enemy willing to die for abstract concepts. The coalition's own reports confirmed this. Their psychiatric staff were baffled by soldiers who couldn't sleep, who jumped at sudden noises, who reported nightmares about humans who kept fighting even after they were killed. The human concept of martyrdom is unknown in coalition psychology, Dr. Kim Woo-bin explained to Earth's leadership. They can't understand why we view death in battle as honorable rather than tragic. But the most disturbing reports were coming from coalition civilian populations. Humans had become the subject of nightmares throughout alien space. Children of 12 different species are having the same dream, Kim So-hee reported. Humans who never stop coming, who can't be killed or stopped or reasoned with. It's becoming a galaxy-wide phobia. Coalition Supreme Commander Thekmaris was a veteran of 40 successful campaigns. He had conquered 15 star systems and integrated 6 different species into the coalition. He understood warfare better than perhaps any living being in the galaxy. He did not understand humans. They lose every battle, he explained to his war council, his 4 arms gesturing at tactical displays. Every single engagement results in human defeat. Yet somehow they're winning the war. His aide, a nervous mammalian creature from the Yixthalan species, raised a paw tentatively. Perhaps if we offered better surrender terms? Thekmaris had considered this. Coalition negotiators had tried to contact human leadership 17 times, offering increasingly generous terms. The humans had responded to exactly 0 of these attempts. They don't want to negotiate, he said finally. They want to fight. And they're teaching us something we never wanted to learn, which is that war isn't about technology or numbers or strategy. It's about will. And their will is stronger than ours. The psychological warfare reports were getting worse. Dr. Song Byung-ho's Operation Terror had evolved far beyond simple radio broadcasts. Now he was transmitting visual recordings of human combat operations directly into coalition networks. The images were carefully selected for maximum psychological impact. Humans charging coalition positions while on fire. Human soldiers who continued fighting after losing limbs. Most disturbing of all, humans who seemed to be smiling while they died. Recruitment across all coalition species has dropped to near zero, reported coalition intelligence. Some species are asking for transfers to sectors of space where humans are not present. But there were no such sectors. Human infiltration teams had reached every corner of coalition space, proving that nowhere was safe from their reach. The reports became increasingly desperate. Coalition officers requested transfers to non-combat positions. Entire fleets reported equipment failures rather than face human forces. Some commanders had begun falsifying casualty reports to avoid being sent to fight humans. We're not just losing ships and soldiers, Coalition Admiral Kexathoran admitted in a classified communication. We're losing the will to fight. Our crews are more afraid of humans than they are of death. On Earth, military analysts studied every piece of intelligence with growing amazement. Humanity was achieving something unprecedented in galactic history: victory through reputation. We don't have to win battles, General Han Ji-woo explained to the Joint Chiefs. We just have to prove that fighting us costs more than any victory is worth. Admiral Choi Min-soo reviewed the latest reports with satisfaction. They thought they were fighting a primitive species. Instead, they're fighting something they can't understand or predict. What's our next move? Asked Colonel Oh Chang-min. Admiral Choi Min-soo looked at the star charts showing coalition territory. Red markers indicated human infiltration teams operating throughout enemy space. It looked like an infection spreading through the galaxy. We keep doing what we're doing. We keep proving that humans are too dangerous to fight and too stubborn to defeat. Counselor Valthera concluded her report to the Galactic Assembly with words that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. The coalition faces a choice. We can continue this war until it destroys us, or we can admit that some species are too dangerous to conquer. The war began in earnest when coalition forces attacked the human colony of New Sol. They expected quick surrender. Instead, they found hell. Special Forces Colonel Oh Chang-min had spent 3 months preparing the colony's defenses. But he wasn't preparing for a traditional battle. He was preparing for something the coalition had never seen before. The alien ships landed exactly where human intelligence said they would. Their troops marched out in perfect formations, energy weapons gleaming in the alien sun. They followed their standard procedure: surround the colony, demand surrender, then move in when the humans gave up. The humans never gave up. Instead, the colonists disappeared. One moment there were cities full of people. The next moment there were empty buildings and silence. The coalition forces found themselves alone on a hostile world with no one to fight. That's when the real battle began. The first coalition patrol vanished during their night cycle. Security cameras showed them walking down a street, then nothing. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just empty armor scattered across the ground. The second patrol found explosive traps hidden in doorways. The third patrol was attacked by snipers who seemed to shoot from inside solid walls. By the end of the first week, coalition forces were afraid to leave their landing zone. Where are they? The coalition commander demanded during a radio transmission that human intelligence intercepted. Colonel Oh Chang-min listened to the confused alien voices and smiled. He was hiding 2 kilometers underground in tunnels the colonists had been digging for months. Above him, coalition troops searched empty buildings while humans moved through secret passages like ghosts. They think war is about controlling territory, he explained to his officers. We're going to teach them that war is about breaking your enemy's will to fight. Captain Lee Yu-jin was having similar success in space. Her ship, the Indomitable, was tiny compared to coalition vessels. But size didn't matter when you fought like a human. The coalition fleet moved in predictable patterns, big ships flying in straight lines, following ancient tactics that had worked for thousands of years. Captain Lee Yu-jin studied those patterns until she could predict exactly where each ship would be at any given time. Then she attacked. The Indomitable would appear from behind an asteroid, fire every weapon it had at a coalition ship's weakest point, then disappear before the enemy could respond. Coalition crews began calling her ship the Ghost, because it seemed to appear from nowhere and vanish like smoke. But Captain Lee Yu-jin's most effective tactic wasn't hit-and-run attacks. It was something much worse. When coalition ships were damaged but not destroyed, she would board them. Not to capture them, but to set off explosives that would destroy both ships. Coalition crews couldn't understand why humans would sacrifice themselves just to kill enemies. Their behavior is irrational, one coalition captain reported. They seem to prefer mutual destruction to allowing us to escape. Dr. Song Byung-ho was humanity's expert in psychological warfare. Before the war, he had studied how to help soldiers deal with trauma. Now he was using that knowledge to create trauma in enemy minds. Operation Terror began with simple radio broadcasts. Dr. Song Byung-ho sent recordings of human soldiers into coalition communication networks. But these weren't normal military communications. They were the sounds of humans fighting to the death. Coalition crews heard human soldiers screaming battle cries as they charged superior forces. They heard the last words of humans who chose to detonate explosives rather than surrender. They heard recordings of wounded humans who kept fighting with broken bones and massive injuries. The psychological effect is remarkable, Dr. Song Byung-ho reported to Earth Command. Coalition recruitment has dropped 60%. Some species are asking for transfers to other parts of the galaxy. But the most terrifying weapon was something humans didn't even realize they possessed: their refusal to accept defeat. Fleet. Admiral Kang Jun-ho commanded the defense of humanity's industrial worlds. His forces were outnumbered 8-1, facing coalition fleets that could destroy planets. Any reasonable military commander would have surrendered or retreated. Admiral Kang Jun-ho did neither. Instead, he used tactics that violated every known rule of civilized warfare. When coalition ships tried to land on human worlds, he poisoned the atmosphere. When they tried to establish bases, he triggered earthquakes. When they tried to retreat, he hunted them down and destroyed them, even when it meant sacrificing his own ships. The coalition had never encountered environmental warfare. They didn't understand how humans could be willing to damage their own planets just to hurt their enemies. They're destroying their own infrastructure to deny it to us, a confused coalition admiral reported. They seem to prefer scorched earth to occupation. The turning point came at the Battle of Ross 128. Commander Shin Dong-wook, the younger brother of the officer who had died in the first battle, led a small human fleet against a massive coalition armada. The humans were trapped. Coalition ships surrounded them on all sides. Surrender was the only logical option. Even retreat was impossible. Commander Shin Dong-wook gave an order that became legendary throughout human space. If we can't win, we make sure they lose too. The human ships didn't try to fight their way out. They didn't attempt to surrender. Instead, they accelerated directly toward the coalition fleet at maximum speed. Coalition officers watched in horror as human ships used themselves as kinetic weapons. Vessels moving at near light speed became unstoppable projectiles that smashed through energy shields like they were made of paper. The humans lost every ship in the battle. But they took 60 coalition vessels with them, including 2 massive dreadnoughts that had been considered indestructible. These creatures don't fight wars, Coalition Admiral Rickstock reported to his superiors. They embody extinction. They would rather die than lose, and they're willing to take us with them. The psychological reports from coalition forces became increasingly disturbing. Alien soldiers were suffering from something their medical staff couldn't treat: fear of an enemy that couldn't be reasoned with. They never stop, one traumatized coalition Marine reported. You can shoot them, burn them, break their bones, and they keep coming. They don't retreat. They don't surrender. They just keep fighting until they die. More concerning were reports of humans who survived injuries that should have been fatal. Coalition medics couldn't understand how human soldiers could continue fighting with wounds that would incapacitate any other species. Dr. Kim Woo-bin explained it to the human command staff. Adrenaline, endorphins, and stubbornness. Other species evolved to avoid unnecessary risks. Humans evolved to chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion, even if the chase took days. So we're literally built to never give up? Exactly. And the Coalition doesn't understand that. They keep expecting us to be reasonable. The war was spreading throughout Coalition space, but not in the way anyone expected. Human forces weren't conquering territory. They were spreading fear. Small teams of human volunteers undertook one-way missions deep into Coalition space. They lived off captured supplies and enemy equipment, turning every Coalition world into a potential battleground. Coalition civilians began reporting sightings of humans in places where no humans should exist. Ghost humans who appeared in the shadows and disappeared before security forces could respond. These reports were often dismissed as mass hysteria. But Coalition intelligence knew better. Humans were somehow present throughout their territory simultaneously, despite having no faster-than-light travel technology. The secret was humanity's willingness to die for strategic objectives. Human teams would travel for months through enemy space, knowing they would never return home. Their only mission was to prove that nowhere in Coalition space was safe from human reach. By the end of the first year of war, Coalition morale was collapsing. Species that had been eager to fight were now questioning whether any territory was worth facing an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with each defeat. "We're not fighting a normal species," Coalition High Command admitted in a classified report. "We're fighting something that gets more dangerous the more we hurt it." But the humans were just getting started. They had learned that the Coalition's greatest weakness wasn't their technology or their numbers. It was their sanity. And humans were about to show them what it meant to fight an enemy that had lost theirs. Commander Lee Daeho stared at the emergency message flashing on his screen. The words made his blood run cold. 3 days ago, humanity's mining colony on Kepler 442b had gone silent. Now he knew why. The transmission was brief and terrifying. Alien ships had surrounded the colony, massive vessels that looked like nothing humans had ever built. The colonists had tried to send a distress signal, but it was cut short. After that, nothing but silence. Lee Daeho rubbed his tired eyes. He had been Earth's outer colonies commander for 8 years. In all that time, he had never seen anything like this. Humans had been exploring space for over a century. They had found empty planets, strange rocks, and dead worlds. But they had never found other intelligent life, until now. The door to his office slid open. Captain Park Sojin walked in, her face grim. She was Earth's best naval officer, tough as steel and twice as sharp. If anyone could handle this crisis, it was her. "Have you seen the new reports?" she asked, dropping into the chair across from his desk. Lee Daeho nodded. 12 more colonies have received the same message. They're calling it an ultimatum. Park Sojin pulled up the message on her tablet and read it aloud. "To the human species. You have expanded beyond your designated zone. You will withdraw all colonies from the outer rim within 30 standard cycles. If you refuse, we will implement pacification protocols." This message comes from the Galactic Coalition. "We do not negotiate." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Lee Daeho had read them 100 times, but they still made no sense. How could aliens know about human colonies? How long had they been watching? "What do we know about this coalition?" Lee Daeho asked. Park Sojin swiped through her files. "Dr. Kim Woo-bin has been working on that. From what we can tell, it's a group of 12 different alien species. They control most of this part of the galaxy, and they're not friendly." As if summoned by his name, Dr. Kim Woo-bin knocked on the door. He was Earth's top expert on alien life, though until 3 days ago that had been a job with very little work. Now he looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. "I have bad news," he said, settling into another chair. "Very bad news." Dr. Kim Woo-bin opened his laptop and showed them a star map. Red dots marked alien-controlled territory. Blue dots showed human colonies. The human colonies looked like tiny islands in an ocean of red. "The coalition has been around for thousands of years," he explained. "They've done this before. 17 times to be exact." "Done what?" Park Sojin asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Found a young species exploring space. Told them to go back home. And when those species refused..." Dr. Kim Woo-bin paused. "They disappeared. Every single one." Lee Daeho felt his stomach drop. "Disappeared how?" "That's the thing. The coalition doesn't just kill them. They study them first. They take their unique biology, their technology, their culture. They harvest everything useful. Then they wipe them out completely." The room fell silent. Outside the window, Earth looked peaceful and blue. It was hard to believe that somewhere out there alien warships were planning humanity's extinction. How much time do we have? Lee Daeho asked. 6 months, Dr. Kim Woo-bin replied. But I don't think they expect us to fight. From what I can tell, no species has ever said no to them before. Park So-jin laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Then they don't know humans very well. Dr. Kim Woo-bin pulled up another file. I've been studying their psychology. Each coalition species evolved differently. Some were prey animals that got smart. Others were predators that learned to work together. But they all have one thing in common, which is, they're reasonable. When they face a bigger threat, they back down. When the cost gets too high, they negotiate. They think like civilized beings. Lee Daeho frowned. Are you saying humans aren't civilized? I'm saying humans are different. Dr. Kim Woo-bin turned his laptop around to show them research files. Every other species in the galaxy evolved as either hunters or prey. But humans? Humans were persistence hunters. We chased our food until it died of exhaustion. We never gave up. We never stopped coming. Park So-jin was nodding slowly. And we're pack animals. We work together better than any other species. Exactly, Dr. Kim Woo-bin said. The coalition sees us as just another species to relocate. They think we'll be reasonable. They think we'll understand that fighting them is hopeless. But we won't, Lee Daeho said. It wasn't a question. No, Dr. Kim Woo-bin agreed. We won't, and I don't think they're ready for that. The door chimed again. Admiral Choi Min-soo entered the room. He was an old man, with gray hair and scars from the colony wars decades ago. He had fought pirates, rebels, and corporate armies, but never aliens. I've been listening to your conversation, he said. Earth Command wants to know our recommendation. The 4 officers looked at each other. Outside, Earth's orbital shipyards were already working overtime. Factories that had been making mining equipment were switching to weapons. The entire planet was mobilizing, even though most people didn't know why yet. Admiral Choi Min-soo sat down heavily. They want us to negotiate. Find some middle ground. Maybe give up half our colonies to buy time. And what do you think? Park So-jin asked. The old admiral was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked up and his eyes were hard as steel. I think the coalition made one big mistake, which is, they threatened humanity. They told us we weren't good enough to explore space. They told us to go home and stay there like good little children. Admiral Choi Min-soo stood up. But we didn't spend 100 years reaching for the stars just to let someone else tell us we can't have them. Lee Daeho felt something cold and determined settle in his chest. He thought about the colonists on Kepler 442b. Were they dead? Captured? It didn't matter now. What mattered was making sure it never happened again. So what do we do? He asked. Admiral Choi Min-soo walked to the window and looked out at Earth's blue oceans. We show them what humans do when someone tries to take our home away. He turned back to face them. If they want a war, we'll give them one they'll never forget. Park So-jin smiled grimly. How do we fight 12 alien species with technology we don't understand? Dr. Kim Woo-bin closed his laptop. We don't fight their war. We fight our war. We show them what it means to threaten a persistence hunter. Lee Daeho nodded. The coalition thought they knew what they were dealing with. They thought humans were just another reasonable species that would see logic and back down. They were about to learn how wrong they were.